some experts in on power purchase agreements. And if anyone did what I did, which was to go onto Google and put in PPA and found the Preparation Academy, you'll be probably sadly disappointed that this is all about energy power purchase agreements and not about performance on stage. But anyway, the interesting part of all of the terrible things that are happening over in Ukraine, and all of the urgency to get to net zero means that the prices in the energy market are very volatile, and they have been for a while, but they have suddenly taken a very high increase and change, and that's affected the wholesale price as well as the retail price. And you know, as people say, every cloud has a silver lining. There are instances where the increase in the wholesale price of electricity can be beneficial to some of the organizations that might be interested in this webinar, which is our community organizations that generate power. So what we've got, and we're very grateful to both Unity and Renewable Exchange for agreeing to give us some insight into what they do and what the PPA market is like just now, in the hope that that can then cascade down to your projects, and to see if there's any benefit that you can take from the changes in recent markets sort of influences. So initially we're going to have Oliver Hunt from Renewable Exchange giving us a wee chat through what they do and what they see the market like at the moment. And then we'll have Tom Hoynes in from Unity and doing the same thing on their platform and what their offering is. Following that, we'll be able to have questions, but we're very happy to take questions in the chat. Like Laura says, the first part will be recorded. So if you want to put your name in against your chat, and you don't mind your name coming up on the screen, feel free to do that and put it in the chat. Once we've done the main presentations, we will stop the recording. So if you want to then make your question available, please do it then. It's entirely up to you. But what we will then do is publish the recorded part of this session. So without any further ado, over to you, Oliver.
Yeah, and thank you very much for the introduction, Andrew. And thanks very much for having us here today. Hopefully you can all see this now. Is that on your screen? Yeah, okay, perfect. Great. So, just to recap, my name's Oliver Hunt, and I'm the UK sales manager at Renewable Exchange. And Renewable Exchange are a tech company who are designed to try and connect any UK renewable generator with every PPA off-taker in order to help them get the best price for their PPA. And I'm going to be talking you through a little bit of a market update right now. So the sort of the state of the power market, and talk about just some of the specifics about being able to actually go out and get a PPA, what different types of PPA there are out there, and how that sort of differs for any newly commissioning assets. But I think it'd be really useful if we quickly start with a bit of a recap as to what's happened in the market over the past 5 years. And we've got some data here from data company from Marek Spectron. And this is a look at essentially the wholesale power prices over the last 5 years. And you can see just how astronomical the increase has been, particularly over the past 6 months or so. And I think it's probably worth noting a couple of interesting points that any of you who've been in the industry for the past 5 years will be more than aware of. We've got some, if you look back towards September and October 2018, there's what was at the time a huge increase in power prices, which was following the beast from the east. There was a huge period of low gas in the UK as we kept injecting, and prices skyrocketed. We saw a lot of generators change from just doing a 1-year contract to pushing out for 2 years at that time. And obviously, if you just focusing on that part, it's a huge pickup, which just looks insignificant now by comparison. Similarly, if we look towards 2019 and 2020, you can see there was a gradual decrease in prices, which many of you who may work with assets on the Feed-in Tariff will probably know that PPAs did become quite low during that time. You might have switched across to the FIT export tariff at that time, which is an alternative for FIT generators. And the market really came to a halt around sort of the start of the pandemic, the introduction of lockdowns meant there was a huge decrease in demand for sort of power and gas. So prices really hit a rock bottom. And just focusing on that part, it's really important to illustrate how much the market fell during that time. And as I said, how insignificant that looks now. If we move forwards into 2021, 2022, you can see that prices have skyrocketed and are far higher than they ever have been. And there's a few reasons for that, which we'll go into now. So the main contributors for the increased prices that we're seeing at the moment have been, not only was there a really low year of wind generation in 2021, I'm sure a lot of you who work with wind sites will be aware of this. And in fact, I think most renewable generation types also saw quite low outputs during 2021. But not only was this a case which meant there was an increased demand for power, primarily from gas, but just gas prices overall increased drastically during this time. So there was an increased demand from the Japanese and Korean markets, which certainly helped contribute towards this. But also, following the pandemic, a lot of businesses and manufacturers that have been shut down for a long time ramped up production, and it all created this perfect storm of low renewables, a massive increase in demand for gas, and also carbon prices picked up during that time as well. But that's the main reason for the huge price increase that we saw coming into 2022. And then obviously, as Andrew said at the start as well, following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we've seen an increase in volatility again. It's meant that the whole gas supply situation is further exacerbated, and it doesn't seem to be showing any sign of slowing down at the moment. But what does this mean for an actual renewable generator? So the Renewable Exchange platform has a suite of forecasting tools. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is just an example graph of I think a 230 kilowatt hydro site in Scotland. And this is a forecast of what they could get for their PPA across the last few months. So they went out to market for a contract that started in the 1st of June 2022. And you can see that obviously there's a direct correlation there between increases in wholesale power prices affecting what you can get from your contract. And it's really important to have visibility on that, so you know exactly what you can actually get from the market. And the whole point of this is, if you go out and actually run a tender when the wholesale power prices are high, you can actually capitalize on that and lock in that additional revenue. Okay, but it's probably best just to talk a little bit about PPAs in general and the options that are available for community groups, reiterating the different options for those groups that already have existing operational assets, but also looking at PPAs for newly commissioning and subsidy-free sites too. So it's probably worth just highlighting the two biggest differences first are whether you go for sort of on-site or off-site. And what we mean by this is on-site PPAs are pretty much anything from sort of private wire or behind the meter assets. So they tend to be, a huge advantage of getting a sort of private wire contract is you're essentially finding a great strike price between what you can get from the export market, what the demand user is paying on the import market, and you can cut out a lot of those sort of non-commodity costs that are associated with contracts. A typical example of this would be if you had a solar array on a school, or potentially a single wind turbine next to let's say a manufacturing business. Okay, even in those instances though, you'd still need to get a PPA, because if we look at the school as an example, Monday to Friday during term time, that's great. When it's sunny and it's generating, that power is probably going to be used by the school, hopefully fully. But during the weekends or when you're in the sort of the school holidays, you will need to export power to the grid. And any asset which is exported to the grid is what we'd call offsite. And that can then be split down into a couple of different options, two of which we're going to focus on today's webinar. I think Unity are kind of going to talk a little bit more about corporate PPAs a little bit down the line. So we're going to focus on the utility PPAs for the time being, which would be a PPA between a generator and between a licensed utility within the UK. Now, you should all be fairly familiar with utility PPAs, but it's worth kind of just reiterating that they all come in a wide range of different shapes and sizes. So you can get short-term PPAs, and I think the shortest we've seen has been probably about 3 months, and they can range up to sort of 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, whatever really meets the needs of that particular generator. The most common sort of durations that we see are typically somewhere between 6 months and 2 years. So for operational assets, that's normally where a lot of the value is in actually going out and running tenders. If you're looking to achieve the best price, it typically tends to be associated with the front seasons. So going for a shorter contract like that tends to yield better results. But we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of demand and appetite for longer term fixes, particularly for new build and for subsidy free assets. So where that particular generator needs to have a secure and guaranteed amount of revenue coming in over the first few years of the project to make sure that they're sort of paying everything back, going for a sort of a 5 or a 7 or a 10-year PPA might be the best option. And then in terms of the actual the power price itself, you've got three main types. So fixed, floating, or flexible. Fixed is the most common that we see, particularly on the renewable exchange platform, where generators are looking to know exactly how much they're going to get paid for their power from the start of the contract to the end of the contract. They can become a little bit more granular where you have, say, a summer or winter price, but yeah, typically you'd see one rate from the start to the end. Floating, where a contract is indexed off either the day-ahead markets or intraday markets, or a flexible contract, which is a sort of hybrid of both of those. It'll be a long-term index contract with the option to fix certain parts. And what's right for your particular project will probably depend on a number of different factors. Okay, so we've had a lot of interest recently for new build assets, and just to kind of reiterate, obviously after the closure of the renewable obligation scheme and the Feed-in Tariff, although I think there are still some new community groups which are just about straggling through from their accreditation period. But following the closure of those two main subsidy schemes, there's been a general sort of lack of new build renewable assets which have come through to fruition. However, that seems to be changing now, and I think one of the main factors there is that not only have costs decreased significantly, those cost decreases might be reversing right now with all the scarcity issues at the moment, but the main reason is that we've seen a huge pickup in those wholesale power prices, and it's actually meaning that whereas before generators might have been quoted, say, 30 to 50 pounds a megawatt hour for a 5 or 10 year fix, they're actually seeing much higher prices now, which are making the projects feasible, which is really encouraging to see. I'd say there are quite a few different considerations which are worth discussing before modelling any sort of revenue from a new build asset. And what's going to affect the PPA are things like the technology, the size of the asset, the amount of time between actually going out and securing a PPA to the commercial operation date, how long you need that sort of spill periods, like commissioning phase to be, and obviously the length of the contract you're going for. So typically the longer the contract, the lower the price you'll get, but you'll get that fixed over a larger period. It's also worth saying that every site is really bespoke here, so it's definitely worth having a conversation and just understanding what is available for your community group. And just as a quick example of this, so this is one of the subsidy-free assets that we worked with at the start of the year. They were going out for a 2-year PPA fixed price starting from the 1st of April 2023. And this was just for a 10 megawatt solar site. This was obviously before all of the Ukraine uncertainty pushed prices up even further, but they were able to secure a £98.44 per megawatt hour for those 2 years, which was more than enough for the project to get built. So really good result for them. Okay, and then just a little bit about Renewable Exchange. So we are the world's largest PPA trading platform and have been established since 2017 with a launch of the platform in 2018. We work with over 1,800 independent renewable generators, and so far have signed over 1,000 PPAs, and that's between the generators and the 28 licensed suppliers that we work with, such as Unity, who are on the call here. Can talk a little bit about what you can actually do with the platform, and then we'll hand over. But the Renewable Exchange platform is a digital marketplace for PPAs, and we offer 2 different services to help inform generators, so independent generators, community groups, asset managers, investment funds. We're all about trying to provide as much information as possible so that you can make the right decision about when you go out to contract and what kind of PPA you go for. We have a pricing engine that sits behind the platform. So for any renewable site in the UK, we can start generating PPA forecasts, which will be fully reflective of market conditions and bespoke to that individual site. And the advantage of which is, as we sort of discussed earlier, is knowing what you should be able to get from the market before actually launching a tender, before going out, and hopefully having better insight into what the power market is doing as a whole. It will help you to go out when prices are higher and secure a better price. So that's the first stage. The second stage is obviously if you do decide to run a tender, then you as a generator can log on, submit a tender to the whole of the market, all 28 suppliers that we work with, and request pricing back at a time that suits you. We provide a really clear analysis of all the individual off-takers who are bidding on your site, and we'll break it down into a total pounds per megawatt hour figure to make it really easy to understand what you can get from the market. Now, of course, price isn't the only consideration. So looking for a supplier who's creditworthy, who you have a great relationship with, or has really good service is important too. So we'll try and make this, we'll be able to show as much information about that particular supplier as possible, and you can decide who you contract with. We also dive down into the individual sort of components of each bid as well, to so you can see the full sort of granularity of the contract and what each supplier is offering. We just put it into a single pounds per megawatt hour figure to make it easy to understand what that means in terms of revenue. And finally, just in terms of working with community groups. So we're really proud to have been working with a number of different community organisations since the launch of the platform in 2018. And so far, we've closed over 100 PPAs for community groups across the UK. And that's about 120 megawatts of renewable energy. That ranges down from, I think, sort of 50 kilowatt solars right up to 10 megawatt wind sites. So it covers all aspects of the community market. And we've got a great case study here from a cooperative, Egni Co-op, based in Wales, who ran a portfolio for a portfolio of 25 solar assets, which were all on different rooftops across Wales. In a single tender, they ran that up to the whole of the market and were able to view all the bids that came back. They then went for a really good price and basically chose a supplier who had extremely similar views to them, and that was, of course, Unity. So they were able to select that and get that all locked away very easily. Okay, and that's probably a really good segue to be able to hand over to Unity. I've got some contact details here, but we'll obviously have loads of time for questions at the end of the call. And please feel free to reach out to me via email or add me on LinkedIn if you have any questions. Okay.
Thanks very much, Ollie. I did actually just type very quickly one question into the chat there, which is maybe too much to answer immediately, but you're welcome to say that you could answer it at the end if you want. It's really just about whether or not there are conditions on PPAs and things like that which can't be captured in a pounds per megawatt figure, but do you illustrate those sort of limitations and conditions when you do your tendering process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say that for the majority of PPAs that we see for operational assets, which are the ones which are typically, say, 1 year or 2 year, a lot of the contracts themselves and a lot of the conditions are very much standardized between off-takers. And in fact, we've actually created our own version of a PPA as well, which is trying to add even more standardization into the whole process. But for those, you tend not to find many differences. The only really condition that sort of comes into play would be for larger assets which need to have some form of credit cover or PCG in place in order to sort of meet the lender's requirements, which we probably tend to find not quite as much for community groups, just because of the way that they're funded. But obviously, if that is a consideration, that's something that can be communicated to off-takers. Where this becomes a lot more bespoke and conditions become a lot more prevalent is certainly for looking for those newly commissioning sites. And they're having things such as the long stop date, so that sort of final backstop for when the site needs to be operational and exporting to the grid, different credit requirements, so credit cover actually required by suppliers to be able to get projects off the ground is a relatively new phenomenon that we're seeing at the moment. These sorts of conditions do all come into it, and it becomes a much more bespoke process there. So the way that we normally envisage that happening through the platform is by running a sort of initial price discovery phase to the whole of the market, just to see who's most competitive for your site. And then at that stage, you can begin the negotiation with the top 2 or top 3 suppliers and look to refresh down the line once you've got PPA terms agreed.
Great, thanks very much. I'm not seeing anything else popped up in the chat just now, so thanks very much for that, Oliver. Over to you now, Tom, and you can explain what Unity do alongside anything else you want to.
Green, hopefully everyone can see that. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of who we are, what we do. My name's Tom Hoynes. I'm the Managing Director of Unity. I've been in the PPA market for about 12 years now, with various organisations, but I've been with Unity for 2.5, nearly 3 years. Unity is a joint venture between Co-op, the Mid-Counties Cooperative, who own the Your Co-op Energy domestic supply brand, and Octopus Energy, who are one of the sort of rapidly growing domestic and commercial suppliers in the UK. We have 2 core areas of what we look at, entirely focused around community energy. One is to deliver power purchase agreements with community generators, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The other is based around these 4 pillars, working with different community groups, where we're looking to innovate with new business models, supply propositions, and different things that can get community-owned generation off the ground in sort of subsidy-free environment. We work very closely and collaborate with a lot of community energy groups across England, Wales, and Scotland. We facilitate in that we help out with groups who have certain projects or different ideas that they want to trial with their members, and I can give some examples of those later. And one of the main things we're doing is trying to inspire the next wave of community energy practitioners, particularly from a slightly younger demographic. And we're doing some work on that with college and university students and apprentices and things. So it's a fairly wide remit, but the main thing obviously that I'll talk about today is the PPAs. So just to give you an idea of what we do, we have power purchase agreements in place with just shy of 200 community-owned generators across the UK. And that is a wide mix of technologies and sizes. So that's everything from, I think our largest site is a 10 megawatt solar. And we're working with some much bigger propositions at the moment. But we also put PPAs in place with spill contracts on rooftop solar installations that might only kick out a few megawatt hours a year. So we've got a fairly broad remit. And one of the things that we do is we try not to differentiate in our pricing from a small rooftop solar to a large standalone solar or wind site. All of that power, so about 215 gigawatt hours of power we buy, which is enough to supply about 75,000 houses, give or take. All of that power is ring-fenced through our supply partner, Octopus, is ring-fenced for Co-op Energy's community power tariff, which is 100% 100% renewable tariff, all supplied by community project. And the main thing that tariff does for community groups is that for every customer that switches onto it, we fill up a funding pot, which all of our PPA generators can bid into, and we pay out from that fund twice a year. We've paid out about £30,000 so far. And that can go to sort of periphery projects that the group can work on. And it's gone from everything from funding outreach projects in schools to paying apprentices, the national living wage, all the way to putting some fencing around a cattle field to protect a solar installation. So it can be used for anything and everything. So that's a little bit about what we do. This is really just reiterating largely what Ollie was talking about, just to give an idea of what we see in the market and what's common for PPA generators. And by quite some distance, the most common power purchase agreement that we have in place with community-owned generators is a short to medium term, so anywhere between 6 months and 5 years, fixed price, though that could be split by seasonal, fixed price agreement where all of the embedded benefits, which are sort of some of the periphery non-commodity costs that can be associated with a generator, are passed through. We give a price for all of the regos that are generated and transferred across to us. And also, if there's if it's an older site with that's lucky enough to have a ROC accreditation, we deal with those as well. And probably second to that, as Ollie was talking about, is sort of the on-site private wire PPA. And the benefits of that, which he covered, so I don't need to go over again. It's just nice long-term security, and it's usually a benefit for the host site because quite often there'll be a discount to their normal energy prices negotiated within the contract, and it's a nice secure contract for a generator because they're getting long-term agreements at usually fairly favourable rates compared to standalone generators, standalone PPAs. So what I wanted to talk about is what can be a bit of a word salad around corporate PPAs, sleeving PPAs, synthetic PPAs, all sorts of different offers that you can find in the market. And quite often the terms are interchangeable, and I will probably get called up by lawyers saying that I've got the terms wrong here, but largely this is what we're looking at. So corporate PPA is essentially an agreement between a standalone entity and a generator, and that entity will agree to purchase their power over typically a long period of time, probably 10, 15, 20 years. And it's facilitated by a licensed energy supplier. Now, what we quite often see with these sorts of arrangements is that they're not typically the best sort of setup if you want to squeeze every pence per kilowatt hour you possibly can out of your asset. What we're looking at is a security mechanism which can give a generator long-term security, and more importantly, the generator's financer long-term security to alleviate some merchant risk in the market. So quite often we will see for these sorts of arrangements an agreement where you might take a bit of a hit on your pence per kilowatt hour, but you get that security over the long term. And without a subsidy backing up new build generation, that gives security to investors and financiers to go ahead and build the site. So that's typically a corporate PPA. Now, there are loads of variations on that, which I won't get into the detail of, but I'm happy to answer questions on. A synthetic PPA then is essentially a financial instrument. And there is no actual need for a licensed supplier to be involved. Quite often there is involvement from a licensed supplier because they will be able to provide reporting and certificate management and some of the administration services that are needed to back up the PPA. But in theory, there's no need for a licensed supplier. And as I say, this is a financial agreement mechanism between, again, a corporate off-taker and a generator, where a strike price is agreed for the power that the generator sells to the grid. So, for example, if the strike price is agreed at £100 a megawatt hour, if the generator is able to achieve £105 a megawatt hour, they will pay the off-taker an extra £5 a megawatt hour to offset their energy supply, because that off-taker is giving them long-term security. Conversely, if power drops below £100 a megawatt hour, then the corporate off-taker will agree to top up that power to match that strike price. So if it's £90 a megawatt hour in the market for the PPA, then the corporate off-taker will pay an extra £10. That is an extremely simplistic way of looking at it. And again, I'm happy to answer questions, but essentially that's why there's no need for supplier involvement, because it is a financial instrument rather than an out-and-out offsetting agreement. The other type, which could be lumped into both of those, which we're seeing a lot of at the moment, is this idea of corporate social responsibility or social premium offtake agreements, where a corporate may not be able to commit to the long term, i.e. 10, 15, 20 years, but they still want to support community energy in some way because of all of the value it adds to their brand, or it's aligned with their ethos. And this will typically be some sort of premium that's attached to all of the power that's generated from a community generator, which the corporate off-taker is willing to pay a little bit extra to show support for that group and the good work that they're trying to achieve in their community. So it's sort of could be either structure. Typically it's a corporate PPA, but I've seen these on synthetics as well. That's something else that we're looking at in the market. The last thing that I wanted to briefly mention, though this is even more of a rabbit hole than corporate and synthetics, is the idea of flexibility services and looking at additional revenue streams within the market. And this is anything from dispatchable generation, where you can ramp up or turn off your generation to align with market conditions, to storage via batteries or whatever technologies we might see over the next few years. And that's something that we're able to offer, and we're working with 3 or 4 community groups looking at these sorts of structures, working with Octopus Energy and their Crack and Flex business. So it's a service that we're working on quite a lot at the moment. So I thought it would be interesting then, given the ideas of the structures, is to really sort of spell out what I think are the main challenges for these types of PPAs. The standard 6 to 5 year fixed price, is a relatively simple concept, and there are lots of different ways that you can enter into that. But for these new innovations, there's I think 3 or 4 main challenges around them. The question that and I realise I'm probably teaching people to suck eggs here, but the real challenge and the question that I probably field more often than not is the disparity between a PPA and a supply contract. And that is probably not to take current times into account, but a corporate off-taker might say, well, I'm paying 15 to 20 pence a kilowatt hour for my supply contract, and a generator will say, well, I'm getting 5 to 6p for my PPA contract. If we come to an agreement, surely we can meet in the middle and everybody's happy. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. When you're looking at corporate PPAs that don't have a private wire, as soon as the electricity hits the grid, you're then responsible for several costs that are associated with things like D&O charges, taxes and levies, and lots of different things that make up the supply. So very quickly, you add on to that PPA price of 5 or 6p, another 5, 6, 7, 8p. And unfortunately, that means that you're not able to realise the entire value of the supply proposition. So you can't get to that sort of 15-20p that the corporate off-taker is paying. You're really only playing in the commodity price section. So that's one. It seems, for me, you know, for people who've been doing it for a while, it seems obvious, but again, if you're just coming to this fresh, it seems obvious the other way. So unfortunately, that's something that creates a barrier quite quickly. Project competition. This is something, unfortunately, that I've seen from several community groups across the country, where a really nice idea for a rooftop solar or a private wire with a corporate has come about. It's been presented to the corporate, and for corporate you can also read local authorities, councils, and the FD gets a hold of it and thinks, well, that's quite a nice proposition, we'll do that ourselves, we don't need the community group's involvement. And then they take the project away and they use their own roof space, or they use the field next to their factory and things. So that's something to bear in mind when looking at private wire and on-site generation projects. Local authorities are quite often seen as the silver bullet for corporate PPAs, because they are entities that have obviously very good security. They're going to be around for the long term. They are a great counterparty if you can make it work for a corporate PPA. Unfortunately, you get embroiled within procurement rules and all of the different local authority challenges around buying energy, how that tender process works. I do know that for a synthetic PPA, so that financial mechanism PPA, that can sometimes fall out of procurement rules, as it's a financial mechanism rather than a purchasing process. So there are potential ways to get around that, but that's something to bear in mind. And then you have the last one is you may have an excellent proposition, something that's going to do good work, support local community group. The CSR and the energy team get all excited about it. You then come across the FD who says, you want me to enter into a contract for how long? That can often be the stumbling block. So one of the things that we found where projects are successful is to get the FDs involved as early as possible, rather than just working with CSR or energy teams. You need to bring them along from the ride. They need to understand it completely, why it's beneficial for them to look at these long-term arrangements. And that's something that has been quite a significant stumbling block for a lot of the groups that we've been working with. So I think I've got a minute maybe left, minute or two. So I'm not going to, I have plenty of other slides, but I'm not going to go into those. Other than this example of the third type of PPA that I talked about, which is a social premium or a CSR type PPA. So this is some work that we've done with Patagonia, who are an outdoor clothing brand. They are extremely vocal and supportive of all sustainability movements across the world. Their campaign across Europe last year was for community energy and the good work that it's doing and supporting community energy projects. And if you haven't seen the We the Power video, it's worth a quick Google. There's a 40-minute version or a 2-minute version, so depending on how much time you've got, it's worth having a good look. But essentially what we did was we created a setup where Energy Garden, who are a community group based in London, sell the power from one of their projects, 250 kilowatt on a Transport for London rooftop, and all of the power that's spilled from that project goes to supplying 3 Patagonia store outlets. And because of Patagonia's support of community energy, they agreed to play what they're calling a social premium. So they play an uplift on that supply, and all of that is directly is paid via us to Energy Garden to support all of the work that they do. So it's a relatively short-term contract, but it adds a quite significant boost to the revenue streams and therefore the community benefit of Energy Garden and the projects that they're looking at. So as I say, I do have some other things, but I'm going to stop there because I don't want to run over, and I'm quite keen to allow time for questions. So that's everything from me.
That's great. Thanks very much. So, there were a couple of questions that came in. I think will we stop the recording just now, and then people can, if they wish to, they can put their hands up in Teams, and you can turn your